everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about aircraft carriers, and more importantly I'm going to be talking about the CV rework and the reasoning for why Wargaming does the things that they do. Because if you ask them, obviously you're never going to get a straight answer, because there's basically a lot of confusion here, why things have turned out the way they've done. And also there seems to be this general idea that Wargaming doesn't realize that the carriers are too strong or unfun and all of these other things. And I can assure you that Wargaming most certainly realize. It's just that this is not a priority for the company. And in order to understand this, first we have to go back. Why has the CV rework failed? Well, if you go back and look at their original goals with the CV rework, you can see that originally they stated that they wanted to reboot the whole class using an innovative concept which will consider all initial issues and challenges. And what they would like to achieve is adequate complexity curve of aircraft carriers, which implies smooth skill growth. This is something that we can maybe give to them, in a sense that, well, they made the actual level of skill required to wield the carriers, like they made the skill floor extremely low, but there's certainly a big difference between really good CV players and average CV players. So there is some skill growth allowed. However, enjoyable gameplay that will be attractive for most players and give more space for resourcefulness of aircraft carrier and its targets as well. Well, that's certainly something they have failed in, because there are plenty of players that heavily dislike them, and this is something that had led to the future choices that they have made. And also give more space for resourcefulness of its targets is certainly something that hasn't happened. In fact, that is a significant failure. The following failure is, of course, create a balanced, integrated class that will enrich the game without ruining it for others. And I doubt there is anyone here that can with a straight face say that this hasn't been a catastrophic and total failure on this point. There has never been as much anti-CV versus CV defender like clashing in the game. There has never been such a direct fight between people who play surface ships and people who play carriers, and the animosity between the two groups has never been as high as it is now. It is fundamentally the most hated class in the game, and honestly we have these two sides that are just fundamentally fighting against each other, and the idea of a balanced integrated class that will enrich the game, that is a complete failure. And I don't think there's anyone who can disagree with that. There wouldn't be this much animosity in the community regarding this class if it wasn't for the fact that they've just failed to make it a part of the game. And finally, of course, increase aircraft carriers' popularity and enhance AA defense ships. Well, see that point there, increase aircraft carriers' popularity. That's something I want you to focus on right now, because that's actually very, very important. And basically of everything else that they said in this fact sheet, that is the most important part of it. That is their key point. Enhance AA defense ships, well, that is obviously a gigantic failure as well. I doubt I have to point out ships like the Atlanta or the Des Moines, or even ships like Montana that were originally added with the whole point of having strong AA, and of course they are very far from that these days. And generally, in fact, AA cruisers tend to be just as juicy targets as any others. However, of course, Wargaming are adding a bunch of new ships, which of course have better AA than the old ships, so that they can sell those new ships, because the old AA ships can't defend themselves anymore. This is why every new ship you see tends to have much, much better AA than the old ones. It's a form of power creep, and it's a form of selling a product. They create the problem and then they sell you the solution. But fundamentally, I guess, looking at this sheet, I doubt there's anyone who can with a straight face argue that this hasn't been a fairly fundamental failure. And we need to look back a bit and we need to understand what is their actual goal. Because if this spreadsheet was their goal, obviously they would be doing a whole lot more to fix the situation. And let's not pretend like they didn't get plenty of feedback from all the CV mains, all the experienced players. But the thing is, what we see on this spreadsheet isn't actually Wargaming's goal. I'll show you Wargaming's goal. Before we move on though, I do have to address the elephant in the room. There's often discussion about are CVs overpowered or not. And this is not really a discussion that needs to be had. If you just refuse to believe what all the competitive teams and all the competitive players and basically all the Super Unicum players say, you can just look at Wargaming's own statistics. In fact, in 2018 they created a metric called Battle Influence, which they use to track how certain classes perform. And in that metric, they basically track relative damage, potential damage, control points, AA spotting, relative spotting damage. They basically track all the things that affect winning a game. Basically, how good is the class at winning matches? And of course, to no one's great surprise, carriers have been the absolute dominant class, followed by DDs. Once again, not a surprise to anyone. The major difference here is, of course, that DDs are extremely vulnerable while providing this. In fact, how often do we not start a game with all the DDs dying? Whereas carriers have superior combat effectiveness from the total safety of the backline of the map. And keep in mind, of course, that this is old data. And that's not a good thing, because since then we have had countless of AA nerfs. We have had huge ones like the 500,000 module. They're removing the flak from that one. They completely sloped all the mid-range flak from every single ship in the game. If we could see the Battle Influence scale now, it would no doubt be even higher that we're seeing right now. So the whole argument, are carriers overpowered or not, it's not actually an argument. You're not really arguing with the Unicum players, you're not arguing with the best of the best, you're in fact arguing with Wargaming's own metric. So that's honestly an argument that should just be put to rest, because every time someone says, oh, they're actually not that strong, you're actually not that good at the game. But what exactly is the goal of the CV rework? Well, see, I thought that at the start, I think they actually they hoped that they would make such an attractive gameplay that they would just drive more players to it without having to do anything else. But the problem was that simply didn't work. So the only really stated goal remaining, the only thing that's really remaining from the spreadsheet, is the one that matters to them the most. And that is maintaining the popularity of the class. In fact, that's very important to them, because there's certain percentages that they have to maintain. If they don't maintain those, then the CV rework has been a failure in the eyes of corporate. So what they need to do at Wargaming is, in order to convince the higher-ups that the CV rework is in fact a success, is to maintain a certain percentage of players playing carrier. And I mean, don't take my word for it. In fact, when pressed for it, they kind of let you know.
Okay, so the first question is, like, you said your goal is to increase the civil population. And I mean, is that goal achieved? Your goal is to increase the civil population. Is that, I mean, do you have a standard of which kind of civil population you want to achieve?
One of the goals was to increase the population. Like, we are okay at the numbers we end up with right now.
Okay.
But the point is that, while keeping all this balance in mind, fun in mind, class interaction in mind, if it drops to this level, from product point of view, it will be just waste of a lot of resources. Like, okay. if the same amount of people play carriers, but we rework everything, what's the point? So
I think now you might be starting to see the problem when it comes to how they're balancing carriers. Balancing carriers is done entirely by the spreadsheet. It is not all the other factors, enhancing AA ships, making it a fun class, all those things has dropped off. The only thing that matters anymore is that popularity number. In fact, they even go in more detail on just how important it is to maintain this popularity percentage of the class.
On the same topic, it went from 15% almost to 30%, and now it's leveled out around 22 or so. So every time any kind of buff to AA is obviously going to affect it in a negative. Do you guys have a critical mass percentage that you want to keep it at or above? 18%, 19% for players? I mean, because basically, if it gets unpopular, you're going to buff it or nerf AAs, and then it seems like kind of a trade-off in a way.
we certainly don't want to drop this be like lower than pre-rework numbers.
Yeah.
In terms of if more players will include carriers in their roster, but they play them rarely, and the population is stable, then it's fine. But of course, we don't want to drop it, and we'll monitor it very closely.
Now that you understand their priorities, the reason why I showed all of this, to understand what their real priorities are, watch how hard it is for Wargaming to answer my simple question. Will they ever balance carriers to the levels of the other classes? It's a simple question, a yes or no answer. Will they ever make carriers equivalent to all the other ships in the game? And apparently it's a simple question, but it certainly doesn't have a simple answer.
Right. The spreadsheets did show that the CV average damage is still the highest across the board, and the influence on the battle was apparently still the highest. I have to ask, is this what you're intending? Is this your goal, to have this class that already has such safety and utility to also be the highest damage dealer across the board?
The spreadsheet, it does say that, but what it doesn't say is it is based on what happened at the end of the battle. So like what happened in the full battle, but it doesn't capture really what happens inside the battle based on like timestamps, because there obviously is some point in the battle where it is decided. And like say, we think that there might be at least some amount of damage from CV being in this not relevant area. Like say when there are a couple ships left and the carrier is more like powerful against single targets, and so yeah, it can in the late game where it is mostly decided but still not ended, it can wrap up some more damage, which will be seen in this battle influence graphics. And we're actively trying to get our hands on this data, because this data, like, there's huge amounts of it, and there's just like some technical problems with storing it and capturing it. But we really hope to get to the point where we really understand why we have the battle influence clearly bigger than the other classes, but the win rate distribution stays like mostly the same, because like the win rate, the battle influence, this much of a battle influence would naturally correspond to a more skill difference, but we don't really see that, and that's why we're trying to investigate it. Up to some point.
But isn't a lot of the damage also incredibly powerful damage? Like, doesn't the carrier have the highest cap reset rate of all classes as well?
Yeah, and it is captured in the battle influence metrics.
Yeah, and DD damage, it's the only class that can do it consistently. I mean, I don't think you can just neglect the damage as unimportant, because it can strike anything.
I don't neglect it, I just like state what our current view of this is. As you see, we dropped the battle influence already, and I'm sure it will drop more with the DPS change in 8.5, so we're working on it.
Yeah, my question was, is your goal to drop it to the level of the other classes?
Our goal is to we want for it to be closer to the other classes, sure, but we also always need to keep an eye out on the CV popularity, because we don't want to make it uncomfortable to play at all. And that's also like we've seen this in the charts and popularity, that this engine boosts affected it, and so we'll need to find ways how to affect battle influence of carriers, and at the same time not make playing carriers like an super unfun experience.
But doesn't it kind of sound like you're artificially boosting popularity by making the class stronger than the others?
No, we didn't because we already are dropping it, and we intend to drop it, and we showed it to you. So it's just that some tweaks may be more painful than others, and that's what I'm saying. We need to find tweaks that are less painful to playing the class, but at the same time affect the battle influence.
So yeah, that was basically a 4-minute answer of yes, but actually no, not really. You'd think it would be a simple fact or a simple thing to ask, will you make one class equal to the others? But apparently instead the answer was that. A lot of priorities, a lot of popularity priorities, a lot of not unfun for carriers and yada 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 yada. And this is really the state that we are in right now, because you see, Wargaming made the mistake of, well, they wanted to make it so simple. That was one of the big issues with the RTS series, was it was actually very complex. It was a lot of things to micromanage. You had multiple squadrons, you had consumables, you had to play around, like you had to control your own ship and everything. So Wargaming took the sledgehammer of stupid onto carriers. They basically made them as dumb as they possibly could. They removed everything that made the class interesting. In the past, planes couldn't land or take off if the class was on fire. What does Wargaming do? Well, first of all, they remove that entire debuff, and then they make fires only last 5 seconds on the class. And they're well aware that the class is overpowered as well, so they make it so the class can't detonate, just to make sure that no accidents happen that can happen to any other surface ship. That alone already kind of tells you that they have this special privileged status. But they made some mistake in making the class so ridiculously simple, so ridiculously dumbed down, where the players can't even control their own ship. They can't control their own damage cooldowns, so in return Wargaming just gave them a ridiculously long damage control cooldown, which lasts, what, 60 seconds, basically a minute of immunity to fires and floodings. They went out of their way to dumb it down as much as they could. In fact, well, back then they claimed, oh, we're absolutely not making it so that it can be ported over to the console version. But in fact, now they basically copy-pasted the carriers that we have right now. They basically the gameplay, they've copy-pasted right over to WoW's Legends, aka the console version. So they basically made console gameplay on PC. They made it so absolutely mind-numbingly dumb. They automated the damage control, they automated the fighters, they automated everything about it. Now the problem is, they hoped this would attract a lot of players. But what happened was, in fact, that a lot of players played these carriers. It was fun at the start, like it was a new aspect, but it quickly got really boring. There's not a whole lot to attract you in the carrier gameplay. Once you played it, you kind of played it. There's not a whole lot going on there. There's not a whole lot you can do about the enemy carrier. There's not a whole lot of things you have to play around, like defensive AA no longer has any effect, and you kind of just go around and left click things. You don't have to care about your own positioning besides when the enemy team finally actually pushes in, and like all the tactical, all the strategical aspects that originally attracted people to CVs, well, those have kind of been erased. And this is the problem, because now Wargaming are at this issue where people get bored of the class, so they just stop playing carriers, and now they have to desperately keep pumping up the numbers. And that's why we see all these honestly ridiculous looking buffs to CVs, where like removing the mid-range flak, that 500,000 upgrade that used to be so good being removed, defensive AA being shredded, like all these AA nerfs across the board, because they have to keep that popularity percentage. It's more important to them than any other aspect. And that's why we're also seeing these ridiculous new ships being added. It started with the Manfred. The Manfred, suddenly they gave AP rockets, something they said, at one point they said it was toxic to have AP bombs or AP strikes. Well, first came the AP bombers, now came the AP rockets. Then they followed it up with another gimmick ship, the FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, which is basically a complete completely ridiculously overpowered ship. It is hilariously overpowered compared to even other carriers, and Wargaming just squeezed it out right onto the market because they're so desperate to keep this popularity number up. And this recent one is the one I'm showing, of course, now is the Imbalance, where we now have skip bombers. Once again, another new gimmick, another new shiny toy with which they're hoping so desperately to attract new players or more players back to playing carriers. Because if the popularity falls, we're gonna have some inevitable ridiculous CV buff or some ridiculous AA nerf, so to keep these numbers stable, keep them basically floating. And this is also, because the class is so privileged, this is also why we see sometimes things that make us scratch our head, like, was that really necessary? A good example is 07, the American clan. They ran these divisions where they would hunt the enemy CV. They played 3 DDs, was it 2 USS kids and an Akizuki, or was it 2 Akizukis and a kid? And they would group up, use smokes and defensive AAs to shred the enemy planes, and they would push through and they would kill the enemy carrier. Basically, they were doing everything Wargaming and basically CV defenders tell that you should. They were grouping up, using consumables and blah 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 and all of this. And Wargaming gave a warning to Furlife, who was the commander of 07 on NA. They gave a warning to him to stop running his division because they were setting a bad example for the community. Because, well, they were hunting down CVs and killing them. They just don't want CVs being sunk early in matches, because players complain like crazy when CVs get sunk early in games, and they're well aware, once again, it's not a debate, they're well aware that the carrier is overpowered, but when you have these divisions hard countering them, well, that really messes with their popularity numbers, and they really don't like that. So that's why you need to understand that in World of Warships, carriers are stronger than the other ships, and it is absolutely by design, and it will most certainly not change anytime soon, probably never, because the gameplay that they have given us is such a pile of steaming garbage that right now there are kids on Xboxes and PlayStations playing the exact same gameplay that we have on a PC, except they're using a gamepad to do it. Every single stated goal of the CV rework has failed. The only thing that they're desperately struggling to hold on to is that player popularity number, and by God, they're willing to do absolutely anything to keep that number up. Hence the gameplay that we see on the live servers right now. Tragic, yes, but that's where we've ended up. And now we have the Commander rework, and following that they want to add submarines to the game. And you better believe that the submarines, considering how much effort and how much work they're putting into the submarines, you better believe they have some stated quota percentage that they'll want to fulfill, like X amount of players need to be playing this class, and you better believe that if they are as boring as they were in the early testing phase, where people got bored out of their minds playing the subs, they will be buffing them to ridiculous values as well. They don't know how to balance, because these days they balance everything based on their precious spreadsheet. Yep. That was all for me. If you watched the whole thing, I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, well, sucks to be you. I'll talk to you guys later.